good evening. Welcome to this month's live Adventurous Inc conversation. It's a bit crazy this week because it's a hybrid event. So we're here, you're there. We've got some people here, we've got some people on the sofa. So we've got hybrid speakers. So Michael, our author, is joining us from Hampshire, and we're all here in Ilkley. You're wherever you are. Let us know where you are in the chat. And if it all goes horribly wrong, well, it's all gone horribly wrong. This is kind of a test event because we're going to come back and do this again next month, same place, as part of Alpkit's Adventure Festival. So this is a good trial run for us all to see how it works. And these kind of people have agreed to be guinea pigs. So thank you all for blessing us with your time. So we're going to be talking Wayfinding, which is our book this month, which I have sent copies out to the mountain rescue folk. Emma, have you had a chance to have a read?
Yes.
Excellent. So everyone's had a chance to have a read. I'm sure folk at home have had a chance to have a read. Some people have had this for 2 months already. It is, as it says on the cover, fascinating. That was the reviews from Sunday Times, Telegraph, New Statesman, and the Scotsman. So yeah, it's a fascinating book. For me, I read it, and it was one of those books that, a little bit like Losing Eden, just really gave us a foundation for what does it all mean? Why does it feel so good doing these things that we do? And it made me realize that actually it's not just a social construct. It's not just that we're all nice middle class folk who enjoy getting out there and going climbing or mountain biking or kayaking or wild swimming or whatever. That there are sound physiological reasons. It's not just a cool thing to do, but actually we've evolved to do this, and that's why it feels so good. So actually everyone else who's doing all those other things, they're the ones who've slipped out of what evolution has programmed us to do. And that, for me, that was a big revelation. Was that, Michael, was that what you wanted to get across when you wrote the book? Did you have a core message in mind, or did you start writing it and think, well, I'm just going to see where we go with this?
It was more like there were just different ideas and reasons that led me to think that it was a good subject. Partly it was because there was a lot of new science coming out on the spatial part of the brain and how it's connected to our other cognitive functions. And so there was this sort of idea that spatial awareness is one of the oldest human functions, survival functions. And it suddenly then seemed to be clear that this was a crucial skill that our ancestors had been practicing for many years. And then I guess the other motivation was, like all of us, I know lots of people who are very good at finding their way and lots of people who are terrible. I mean, in my family, we have those two extremes. So I was just intrigued as to, why some people are good and some are terrible.
Well, I think it's fab. So we're going to get into that. So we're going to talk about how we feel at home in places and why we feel at home. We'll talk a bit about finding our way, as you would expect from a book called Wayfinding. We'll talk a bit about losing our way. But there's a great bit in the book where Michael says we're all spatial beings, and the way we experience our environment affects us deeply. And that for me really brings it to life. It gets right to the heart of this. So Michael does a great job of introducing loads of neuroscience, of social science. There's so much in here, but there's one bit that's fascinating where he talks about the shift in our spatial awareness when we're a child. So up until about the age of 4, our spatial awareness is all very social. So if a child gets lost, they say, "Where's my mummy?" But after the age of 4, you get to the point where they say, "I'm lost, where am I?" So they've changed from this social relationship to a spatial relationship. And there's some brilliant stats in the book where you talk about the spatial range. What do you call it? The home range, and how much that's reduced in recent years. And you even talk that the children's home range, the distance that they travel from home, has reduced by 90% since the 1970s, which is which is a phenomenal figure. So for a starting question, I wanted to ask Emma and Caddy, how far did you go from home when you were kids? What was your home range when you were kids?
First up, I was lucky. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, so my home range was pretty big. I was able to go around fields as long as I could see my house, I could go that far. And I was lucky that I had parents that encouraged us to go far, and when we went on walks, it encouraged us to go and find our own way. And even when briefly we lived in a city, we briefly lived in Bristol for about 2 years, I walked to school by myself, I went to my friends by myself, went to the park by myself. And I think that was partly a bit, you kind of touch on it in the book, that I had the confidence to do that myself, and the trust that my parents put in me meant that I did that and was more aware of what was around me than other kids who just got dropped off. So I was, went quite far.
Which explains why you're a mountain leader and a navigation instructor now. I'm sure we'll come back to each other. Paddy, what about you? How far did you range?
I'm trying to think right back to the early 70s, actually. So school-wise, I think I walked to school from about 6 years old. Maybe a small group from our village to the school. But I do remember at around 10 years old cycling with a few friends, and about 20 miles from our home, which panicked all our parents. I think we did something like it was probably something like 15 miles radius, so 30-mile cycling. We're all around 10, 11 years old, something like that.
And of course, no mobile phones, no way of keeping
nothing, nothing. I mean, yeah, and then you had to I think it was 2 pence for the public telephone in the red box, something like that. So I think we had to read direct charges, I think. Something
Reverse
like that.
charges.
Reverse charges.
Those are the days.
Reverse
Those are the
charges.
days.
That was, so then what would that be in 10? That'd be late 70s.
Wow.
So I remember that. Yeah.
But Michael, what was that your cat joining us there? What's your cat's home?
Sorry about that.
So did you roam as a child?
Yeah, I did. Similar story. I grew up just a few miles away from where I live here, and was allowed to run around and get into the woods, and that. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a particularly great navigator, but I'm definitely happy and confident to be out in the wilderness.
But it was startling figures. I got a sense that was the change that had happened, but really 90% drop in that distance is a startling figure. So I mean, what I loved that you've done here, and that's the perfect illustration, is that you've mixed the science of all this, and we'll get into that. It seems like it's quite an emerging science, but you've brought out some fabulous stories as well, and I think it really helps bring the stuff to life. You talked about journeys out of Africa, and it just made me think that there must be so many stories of journeys that have been forgotten, that humanity has got no way of keeping. But in your research, did you find any particular cultures who were better at telling stories about wayfinding and route finding?
I mean, cultures within cultures, the people who are good at telling those stories are the people who spend a lot of time traveling. And actually, I spend a lot of time talking to search and rescue experts, like your two guests there, and they're of course full of stories, because they're encountering people who are encountering wilderness for the first time, or being challenged by their environments, and it can be a very emotional thing, wayfinding, because you're very aware of your environment. When you get into a situation that you're a little uncomfortable, it's the emotional parts of the brain that really kick in, and they don't always help you, but you sure do remember those episodes. And people who have been properly lost always have a good story to tell, and they also remember that emotional often a sense of sheer terror, something that is always associated with that story. So yeah, I really found that the people who tell their stories are people who've had the experiences.
But I guess there's a whole lot of people who aren't necessarily able to tell their stories as well. I think because one of the things that really struck me from the book, and I'm sure it's something that the guys from the mountain rescue team will back up, is that there's some people who, you know, they're lost already. That's the phrase you use, isn't it? They're lost already before they start to wander and before they get physically lost.
That's right. I mean, so you're talking about people who have dementia, for example, people who are depressed or despondent, as the sort of search and rescue term is, I think. And this is the interesting thing, that your people wayfind in very different ways, depending on their personality, their age, sometimes their gender, but also the state of mind that they're in at that time. So people who have dementia tend to travel in a straight line, and they will carry on in that straight line, often, you know, through obstacles. And it's a curious psychological phenomenon as much as anything else, I think, why they do that. And depressed people often feel compelled to move, to walk. Perhaps it has some kind of healing property, or I don't know, it's hard to tell, but it's the psychology of wayfinding that really sort of interested me.
And so you mentioned before about it's an emerging sort of science. So is this all new stuff that we're finding out, or is new scientific knowledge sort of meshing with older, more traditional forms of knowledge? What's the balance of our understanding of how we find our way? Is it all new, or
I think a meshing is a good way to put it, because of course there's ancient wayfinding knowledge which you would find in indigenous communities that live in open spaces, in wilderness spaces, such as the Inuit in Alaska or northern Canada, who have a tradition of traveling across tens, hundreds of miles of tundra and ice. And those traditional skills are very much still around in those communities, although the young don't use them so much because they have technology. And so those traditional ideas and methodologies are still there, but what's new is the understanding of what's happening in the brain when we make these journeys, and what happens, how we are able to remember places that we visit, come back to, and can find that we can still find our way through it, and why some people become disorientated more quickly than others. Reducing it, I mean, you only get one picture looking at the brain, the cells that are firing when you move across a room, for example. That'll tell you about how the brain works, but it won't tell you why you make the decisions that you make, or why a decision makes you feel the way it does. So to really understand how people navigate and how it makes them feel such a way, you need all kinds of different subjects, and that includes neuroscience, psychology, and traditional understanding of how people interact with their environments.
And that I think that why is really interesting, isn't it? Because why in the modern world is completely different to the why that we evolved with. You were talking about Inuits there, and I loved how in the book you talk about it, we needed to make frightening, bewildering places seem more familiar, so we would start to give them names. And you've got a wonderful example. I can't pronounce the Inuit version, but it was the place where someone left a pouch, where someone once left a pouch. But it's that importance, that psychological importance of making us feel more at home in a place that compelled our ancestors to give names to places, to start to recognize landmarks, and to start to try and make sense of it all. And I guess that was a social thing that happened such a long time ago to ease our passage through things, and now it's embedded there in our brains, isn't it?
Exactly. And I mean, if you name a place, it has several purposes. I mean, one thing is that you're more likely to remember it. Also, the names that people give places often have descriptive terms in them. So, you know, there are many sort of hills that look like a head or something, or the red rock, or but also the example you gave there, that describes an actual event. So there's cultural information in that name, and so people from the community will understand that. But naming a place, it sort of puts it up on the map in our head. Recently, I was chatting to some rescuers who work in cave systems in the Brecon Beacons, and they were telling me about this 50-mile cave network that has recently been mapped. And I was asking them, you know, how they find their way and remember their way, and they said they give all the features in the caves names so that they can remember it, and it sort of embeds it in their brain.
I'm going to come to these two in a minute, but I'm going to ask you first. Have you got a favourite place name then? Because you must have come across, and then I'm going to ask you two. So fair warning, favourite place names. Where was your favourite place name you came across as you were doing this? Because I love the place where someone once left a pouch. What a brilliant name that is.
Yeah. Well, I guess my favourite maybe is one that I know extremely well, which is my grandparents' sheep farm in Scotland. There's an outcrop there called Craig Nan Ewan, Rock of the Birds. And the amazing thing about the Rock of the Birds is that name is probably centuries old, but there are still birds, raptors, that nest in those rocks, and it's just such an effective place name. There's also a hill up there called the Lord's Hillock. The Lord's Hillock is not a big hill, but it's right at the top of this big glen, and it literally does lord it over the landscape. And again, you know, it's just a cleverly named feature.
Wow. Guys, favourite place names? Nothing rude now.
I'll go first then. Okay, I'm just trying to think about it. So my wife's American, so I spent a lot of time in New England, and especially in the Adirondacks, up from the north of the Catskills. So one of the mountains there is Mount Marcy, which is the highest in New York State, which is local name is native name is Tahawas. But just below the summit is a beautiful lake, beaver ponds, and moose, and that's called Lake Tear of the Clouds.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I don't know its native name, but that's where it translates, that Tear of the Clouds. So I think that's a beautiful spot.
Yeah, well, I had the luxury of living in Wales for 2 years, in North Wales, where the hill names are so descriptive, not only of the colour and the look, but also of the local folklore. And so I really like, there's kind of a string of hills leading down Argwen Valley, which kind of tell a story. There's one called Penllithid Rack, which is roughly, I think, the Hill of the Witch, and then there's Penllithid, which is Hill of the Black Dog, and then you've got the Carneds, which are named after all the Welsh princes. And so the story is that the Helgidu, the Black Dog, is protecting the Welsh princes from the Hill of the Slippery Witch, which is craggy and long and has all sorts of crags going off the other side. So I like that description, that as you go down that side, you've got folklore, local tales unfolding to one side of you, and it just gives you an extra connection. And like you said, it enables you to remember, and it tells a story of a culture that's been there before. So
it's amazing, isn't it? And these things that we sort of take for granted, and you go, oh, it's a nice name, but actually there's reasons that these places have got nice names. Michael talks about it as an amazing cognitive miracle that when you recognize a familiar landmark and your brain says, I am here, you know where you are again, which for me is a fascinating thing. And I'd never thought about it in that sort of sense until reading the book. So I mean, thank you. Just one of the many fascinating things in the book. And so when you get into talking about the way that the brain cells fire and the neurological stuff that's happening there, there's a fascinating bit in the book where you talk about rats that are placed into plastic carts and moved around a maze, and a maze that they could work their way around quite happily when they were walking around, placed into the plastic cart and moved around not under their own steam, and all of a sudden they can't find their way around. Which strikes me as fascinating and a real metaphor when you think about all the metal boxes that we travel around in now, for how we know places or don't know places and are separated from. Was it a surprise to you to discover that?
In a way, yes, but then there's a human analogy which I came across, a study involving boys that looking at their journeys to school, and the boys who they were all asked to draw a map of the route they took from their home to school, and some of the boys walked, some of the boys were driven by their parents, and the boys who walked to school every day were able to draw a very detailed map that was correctly orientated and to scale, and also had details about the things that they passed on the way, the houses, the shops, this kind of thing. But the boys who were driven to school were not capable of doing anything like that kind of detail on their map. I mean, their maps were also misorientated and not to scale and very lacking in detail. And that's the equivalent to those rats being moved around not under their own steam. It's just a lot harder for our brains to retain that kind of information and remember it.
So it just makes you think that we've got this whole society that's moving around and none of us really know where we are. But it also makes me think about all the books that we read about and the adventures that we go on ourselves when you walk somewhere or go on a bike or go on a kayak or paddleboard or whatever. And when you get there, you have a sense of knowing the place better, really. And again, for me, that was the book helped really make sense of that. It was absolutely fascinating, and again, it just spoke to that what we're doing just feels so right because our brains have been programmed for it.
And of course, the other thing about those rats and those schoolboys is that they were being moved, they were being driven. They weren't actually taking the action themselves. And if you're in a car, if you're driving a car, and you pay attention to where you're going, there's no reason why you shouldn't remember your route perfectly well. But you have to pay attention. And if you're being driven by your parents to school back of the car, you're not going to be paying attention.
And I think we'll talk a bit more about that when we talk about finding our way and the importance of noticing and observation. Just before we move on, the final bit that again absolutely blew my mind was this idea about how time and space fit together, and how we use space to create episodes in our brain and form memories. And for me, it really started to make sense for why COVID, the time just seemed to pass in such a strange way. And it seems to me that it's because we weren't going through all those different spaces, because we were stuck at home, that our memories didn't form the same episodes they would in normal life. Was that your understanding of what was happening in that sort of strange COVID time when we were all in lockdown?
Yeah, I think that's one explanation for why time felt so strange, because, as you say, that it was just sort of one long event for often those periods of lockdown when people would not do many different things in a day. And our brain seems to organize memories as events or episodes. And so and it can be like, going from one room to another in a way is an event, and you build up sort of boundaries between these episodes. And if you have a lot of things going on, a lot of events, a lot of episodes in your day, then when you remember the day, it feels a lot different to how it would have done if you just sat in your house, because there'll be more event boundaries, so your sense of time is different. And of course, this is all to do with a spatial part of the brain, because it seems that our brains remember events and episodes in a spatial way. I mean, it's difficult to remember an event without remembering where it took place and sort of the nature of the place in which it happened. And that spatial information is very important to memory formation. If you're just sitting in the same place for a long time, then that can be quite disruptive. An extreme example is prisoners kept in solitary confinement for long periods who don't move out of their cells, and that usually results pretty quickly in cognitive disruption, mental illness, paranoia, all the rest of it. It's not healthy.
Yeah, so just goes to show. I'm gonna have to impose on myself a swear jar for saying fascinating, because I'm just going to keep repeating that word. I look to say I'm asking all the questions. We've got some folk. If you guys want to ask questions, feel free to chip in. I'm sitting there very quietly, so you can chip in. Don't worry about that. Anna, are you in with the chat? Are you there?
Yeah, I am.
So I can't follow the chat quite as well as I do when I'm stuck in my little four walls. But Anna's following along here. So if you've got any questions, throw them into the chat, and Anna will do this from behind the camera, and we'll feed them in. So please do chip in with your questions. So I'm delighted, but not that surprised, Michael. I have to say that you've got a map behind you. What's the map behind you? I can't quite make it.
This map is it's an old map of Asia, and in fact, if you're very observant, you'll notice that it's actually inaccurate. Well, it's inaccurate according to today's boundaries. So there's no North Korea. Tibet is very much displayed as its own country, independent of China. I think it came from a French, it's a French school map, educational map, but I'd like it for the.
It looks fun. So you possibly almost answered my first question, which was going to be about, do you have a favourite map or a favourite card or a favourite map maker? You know where this is going.
I just love looking at Ordnance Survey maps. I could do that for longer than I would be prepared to admit.
And we're so fortunate to have the Ordnance Survey. I mean, Emma, you must notice that when you're teaching navigation, to have a resource like Ordnance Survey to base, it must be really powerful. I mean, given that this is your job, you must thank the Lord for them every time you pull one out.
Definitely, and that it's such a clear language that once you start to decode it, it does just unroll itself in front of you. I have to say I prefer Harvey as personally for personal use, especially in the winter, the way that Harvey's maps depict the terrain and features and everything. It's just something very pleasing about it. And I've got a book at home that is just maps, just the Scottish Munros, and you could just scroll just page after page of, I want to go there, that name looks cool, those rocky outlines on the map, and you can kind of visualize it in 3D so that when you do get there, you know exactly where you are.
Ready?
It's the same really. Obviously we utilize OS to a significant extent, but again, my preference is Harveys, especially when you're looking, for example, say a cooling ridge, if you're on Sky. It's a lot better. It's a lot better to interrogate interpret from Harveys, I think.
And why do you think that is then? What's the extra thing that you're getting from a Harveys map that you don't get elsewhere?
It's the way they it's shading, the shadowing a little bit of how they've sort of applied almost an artwork type and to some of the features. It's like some of the lakes maps are really good when they've applied. I think that term is chiaroscuro, when they've applied the black and white and shading and just in black and white, and they look a lot, you can understand a little bit easier. But I'm a caver, so I came from a caving background. So some of the best things are some of the cave charts for big systems.
So how does that work then when you've got how do you map something in 3 dimensions?
Yeah, well, nowadays there's more technology for 3D mapping. In the old days, it was, compass and chronometer in the cave.
But then what does it look like when you get it as a map? How do you represent that you've got this cave that goes that way and then it goes that way and then it's where?
You have to, 2D map, you really have to cross section, don't you? A section for each type of passage shape. So you've obviously got the dimensions of the passage relatively relevantly, and then you might have cross sections of different shapes of the passage. This is a keystone shape, keyhole shape. Sorry, so they're fascinating. And then if you expand that on, so obviously you've got it in this level. You've the horizontal level, and then it's vertical development, and then what you can't see is which connects to this. And it's fascinating if you look at some of the systems.
Sounds amazing. We've got a question.
Yeah.
Go on, Anna.
Michael. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Those with dementia travel in straight lines despite their deterioration, but those with typical mental capability often seem to struggle to go in straight lines. Did I understand the book correctly? It says Peter Ball.
So what I think what you're saying, you're comparing the people with dementia who seem to have no problem traveling in a straight line with the rest of us who end up walking in circles if we try to do that. So it's not clear why people with dementia travel in this way, often travel in this way. One reason could be that they tend to just focus on what's ahead of them, and their vision is sort of more tunneled, and their minds are more tunneled because they can't recall the past. They just know what's ahead, and somehow that propels them forward. I don't know how, if you left someone with dementia, if they walked on and on, how long they would manage to stay in a straight line. I don't know. It's a great question. But for other people, we tend to find it very difficult to move in a straight line if there are no landmarks or boundaries to help us. So if you're on a moor, walking across a flat area without any obvious features, or if you're in a forest, which effectively comes to the same thing, you're surrounded by landmarks, but they're not actually very useful because they're not distinguishing. Or if you're in fog, if you're trying to walk in fog, people tend to walk in a fairly tight circle back and end up within 100 meters or so of where they started. That's obviously a generalization. It doesn't always happen, but there have been experiments that have shown that this is not just a myth. And that one explanation for that is if you look on the level of the brain cells that help us orientate, they need visual anchors, if you like. They need a visual landmark or boundary to stabilize that spatial system. And without that landmark, it becomes very difficult to track where you're going. Why we end up in a circle rather than doing some other kind of shape is a mystery. It's a strange thing.
I'm sure Man and Rescue have got some thoughts. As you were telling me before we started about some stats that you use to narrow down the search area that they're lost.
Yeah, so following on from that discussion on dementia, so we so if it's a missing person that's been reported missing, rather than a lost person on the hills, a little difference there with missing person versus somebody lost. So we use there's a police tool called iFind, which is based on, it's basically all the missing person data historically for a number of years. Came from the Grampian Constabulary at one point, who in Scotland had recorded this. Yeah, so we can use that as a tool which defines age category, dementia, for example, or in terms of school children, school ages. I think it's like, for example, 9 to 12, etc. And from that, you can make a it's not obviously foolproof, but you can make an assessment on a Pareto analysis of areas to search. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just enabling live transcripts. Should have done that and stuff.
So it's a useful tool. It's not predictive as such. It's predictive in some way, but it's based on historical data that the police have recorded from every missing person.
Wow.
So it's a useful tool.
Well, I mean, I guess it must be, or you wouldn't be using.
Yes, true. But all police forces in the UK will use the same tool. When the police appoint an officer called a POLSA, which is Police Search Advisor. So they go to the National Police College, they train specifically in search, and they would then pull in each different resource that they can, mountain rescue or RAF rescue, etc., for the search. So it's good, useful data. I think moving forward might be some better predictive tool, but I don't know when.
And you drew a distinction, as Michael does in the book there, between people who are lost because kind of for some reason other than being out on the moor and being benighted or what. So does that differs how you go and find them, how you try to find them?
Yeah, there's a subtle difference, isn't there, between a police report of somebody missing and, let's say, vulnerable, versus somebody, a walker who's been reported missing, that's separated from their group, decided to do some other hill, mountain, and didn't return to an agreed position. That's a little different from a missing person.
And does it? I mean, I guess does it make it more? Because I imagine some of these aren't nice and things to have to go and find someone. You know, you've got to go out and find someone who's in a difficult situation. Does it change your approach to it, or do they all get sort of treated the same way?
Yeah, it does change the approach. So obviously the red flag is if it's vulnerable person and suicidal, and a history of suicide attempts, suicidal tendencies. That changes our thought process a little bit in terms of how we'll what we need to prepare for at a particular scene.
Yeah, that must be very different. And Emma, when people come to you for navigation training, do you find that it's because they've had an experience of getting lost, or is it more that they're worried about getting lost?
Yeah, I'd say it's more that they're worried that it's going to happen to them, and maybe that worry is stopping them from being able to enjoy the hills or the mountains in the way they want. Or even my new partner is really into walking, but I'm worried if I get separated, what's going to happen to me, and that kind of thing. For a lot of people, the fear of getting lost is stopping them from doing something they enjoy. So just giving them, even if it is a few tools or a strategy, without having a total, complete, thorough understanding of navigation, say in fog or whatever, just knowing where to start, or knowing that there is something you can do, for a lot of people will then enable them to go further, go places they've never been before, give them confidence to go, oh, actually, I can
go on this walk with my friends. I can, for some people, I can take a shortcut over the moor to get to the next train station and get the train back. Things like that give people their independence. And I've noticed it a lot since COVID as well. A lot of people have gone, I really enjoyed during lockdown connecting all the green spaces in my area using Google Maps. I can't use Google Maps on the moor. Can you teach me how to, even if it's just you reading a orienteering map or an OS map or anything, just so that there's not a total dependence on the blue dot and where it is on the screen, which is encouraging, I'd say.
And we'll talk about the blue dots on the screen in a moment. Talking about strategies, there's a lovely one in the book that Michael talks about that school children are taught in the States, which is the hug a tree course. So if you get lost, the idea is that you stay put and they're taught to hug a tree. That's right, isn't it, Michael?
That's right. That was taught at school, and it certainly saved one boy. The story I heard that he did that, and he was found. The advice often that search and rescue and rangers give you is that if you discover that you're lost, is to stay where you are. I don't know whether Emma and Caddy, whether that applies to your territory, but that's often the advice, and people find it almost impossible to follow that, because when you realize you're lost, you're sort of overcome by anxiety, fear, terror often, and that overrides that little voice telling you you should really stay where you are. And it's very difficult to make any kind of rational decision if you're really properly lost, because it often feels like you may die. So it's interesting that advice seems so difficult to follow.
Is that the standard advice? Stay put.
It depends, to be honest, doesn't it? There's a few factors that influence that decision, isn't there? One is, does somebody know where you have been travelling, and therefore is likely to report you missing? If nobody knows where you've been or where you intended to go, then who's reporting that you're missing? Are you injured? There's another factor in that. What's the environmental condition? Do you have the equipment to stay put and survive in terms of potential, obviously hypothermia is mentioned there. So there's a few factors in that. But certainly if you were lost, I'd say, if you were lost on the hills and you'd left a, information with somebody, this is my plan today, this is where I intend to go, or you've left your other party somewhere, you couldn't carry on, this is the route I'm planning to take, and you got a little lost from that route, same fog, then certainly I'd sort of hunker down if I could. Yeah. So.
And so again, the importance of telling people where you are. I know we've spoken to lots of authors who back that up from their own experience of actually you need to tell people where you are. But Claire Nelson being the main one that sticks in my mind when in things I learned from falling, she went out on a hike in Joshua Tree, falls off the edge of a cliff. But because she'd told some friends where she was going, that was how she was found. And it's an incredible story. It's genuine near death. But if she hadn't told anyone where she was going, she would never have been found and wouldn't have been here to tell her story. And she's the biggest advocate for tell people where you're going, so that at least if you do stay put, you've got a chance to be found.
Could I just add, coming from the underground side as well, and caving, it's almost mandatory, isn't it? In caving, I'm looking at the two cavers here with me. It's mandatory that you leave information with somebody who's not caving with you that day. What's the system we're going into? What's our estimated exit time? And then a couple of hours leeway for that. And at what point should I call 999 and say somebody cavers are overdue? So it's pretty much standard, isn't it, amongst our community that happens.
And you mentioned there, Michael, about the tricks that the brain plays on us when we do find ourselves lost. You talked about walking in circles, or the compulsion to think, oh, it's over there. I need to go over there, which is fascinating. There's another one that you talk about in the book where people sort of their brain does what the brain's meant to do, and it tries to make sense of everything, so it will orientate themselves and say, even if they're completely lost, it'll say, oh yes, you are where you think you are on the map, so yes, that stream is there and that cliff is there, even though they're maybe in a completely different valley. Our brain works in a way that it's trying to keep us safe, it's trying to comfort us and tell us that we're in the right place, but that can send us down all sorts of wrong routes that can get us further into trouble, can't it?
Yeah, I think that often gets people lost in the first place, that tendency to sort of tidy up your environment, and you can be walking along somewhere, following your compass, counting your steps, whatever, and it just doesn't feel right because maybe it's asymmetric with the landscape around you, and you think, oh no, actually I should be just on that ridge over there, and I've just misread my map. So I'll go and try that. And of course, once that happens, it's very difficult to get back on track because you don't actually know where you are. But that is a tendency of the brain to sort of to straighten up, tidy up our world and make it familiar. We tend to want to be in places that feel familiar, and that may be a survival mechanism in some ways, but it can also make us go astray.
And so for the I'm guessing for the purpose of the book, Michael, you got yourself lost, didn't you? So again, one of the stories we've heard in Adventurous Inc. before was about inchworm on the Appalachian Trail, and we had Gail Muller who was telling us the story of inchworm stepping off the trail deep in the woods, and you went back, didn't you, Michael? And you found it yourself. And you experienced that terror. I'm gonna try and find the bit where you were. There you go. I put down my backpack with my compass map and GPS tracker and walked into the undergrowth to see what lay beyond. I didn't go far, probably not more than 80 paces. But when I turned back, I couldn't see where I'd left my things and wasn't sure which way I was facing. I stumbled about, forgetting everything I'd learned. It can't have taken me more than a minute to get back to the clearing, but in that skip of time, I felt a terror that almost stopped me breathing. Nothing can prepare you for it, that tumbling into the void. I don't ever want to feel it again. I mean, that's quite a way to go for your art, is to experience the terror of it.
Yeah, no, I should point out that I definitely did not intend to get lost for the purposes of writing the book.
Sorry, I wasn't saying you did, but I mean, it did give you that visceral experience.
Oh God, I mean, it did, and it was an accident, and it was sort of foolish on I made a mistake, but it was just amazing how that mistake translated into that situation, and I had already broken all the rules because I didn't tell anyone where I'd gone, and I was alone. So it was the perfect storm, really. But it was not only terrifying, but it also affected my behaviour. I mean, by this stage in my research, I talked to a lot of experts, and I'd heard what you were supposed to do in these situations, and also knew what people tended not to do. I mean, despite all that, I just found it impossible to think properly, rationally, and I was just running around, and it was just lucky that I came back into the clearing. So yeah, I don't know how you get over that.
I mean, is that something, Emma, that you touch on when you're teaching people about how to behave when something goes wrong, to try and calm down and compose yourself?
I'd say, yeah, and for me personally as well, it was the hardest thing to overcome, was trust what you're doing, trust your compass, and trust what your feet are telling you. Because if you're saying you're wiped out, so there's snow on the ground, it's snowing and there's clouds, you're on the inside of a ping pong ball, it's white, you don't know where's up, where's down. All you know is feedback from your feet and what your compass is doing. And in that point, like you say, it's panic, it's I've got to keep moving, my compass must be wrong, this doesn't feel right, I've been going for ages. You just need to trust in the technique. And I had it once where just my compass did a tiny little just a jolt. I must have knocked my elbow or something, and it made me go, oh no, my compass is broken, this is it, I need to go back. Started turning around, then didn't know where, and it just takes kind of a proper, okay, no, the compass is right, get the spare one out of the bag, got a spare one, they're both the same, okay, and carry on. And that, yeah, that's the hardest thing to do, and is not many people ask about it, because and it is a terrifying thing to actually, oh, I'm learning all of this, but what if? But yeah, it's just trust the technique, ignore the little voice in your brain going, you're wrong, what if? Oh no, the wind's coming from a slightly different direction. You've got a compass, you're counting, that works, follow it. It works when it's sunny and you can see where you're going, it will work when it's white and you don't know where you are. So, yeah.
Take 2 compasses, I'll remember that one.
Yeah, always have spare.
2 compasses, there we go. So I mean, we've talked a lot about getting lost and how it's a scary thing. There is a flip side to that, and it's the importance of occasionally losing ourselves. So you covered this as well, Michael, and you talked about sometimes we need to get lost, and sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing. So and we'll move on to talking about GPS and technology and how that changes things. But in the book, you say GPS offers the possibility of never being lost. Some people find the thought appealing, but it may not be quite what they imagine. When we live in permanent geographic certainty, we lose something of ourselves, some possibility of growth. As Rebecca Solnit writes in the Field Guide to Getting Lost, never to get lost is not to live. Not to know how to get lost sometimes brings you to destruction, and somewhere in the terra incognita in between lies a life of discovery. And I think there's a balance to strike, isn't there? That sometimes we need to have that space to wander. Let's do the talking. Not all those who wander are lost, and there is an importance to that, isn't there?
Yes, I think it very much comes down to a personal choice, and it's almost a sort of aesthetic choice. I mean, using GPS it's obviously an incredibly useful technology, and you can go through life relying on it, and you'll be fine. But if it matters to you to feel a connection to your surroundings and to build a memory of the places that you're going through and how you get to them, if that kind of thing matters to you on a deeper level, on an aesthetic or an emotional level, then it's a very good thing to learn how to put the GPS away and to experience those feelings. I'm not suggesting that anyone would live life without a sat nav, but I suppose it's a way of trying to marry the two, if these kinds of things matter to you.
And I think you do a great job in the book of explaining how technology like GPS changes that relationship. So, we started out by talking about the importance of landmarks and how that makes us understand where we are and the familiarity, and our brains are wired to do that. And now we've all got this technology that exists in our pockets for as long as our phones have got charge, that can center us geographically on a map. But it poses that question of, in doing that, do we lose where we are, and do we stop noticing and then either lose part of the experience or lose ourselves when the battery runs out or we drop the phone and it smashes? It's a real double bind, isn't it, really?
Well, it's a good test is if you travel somewhere just using your GPS, your sat nav, and when you get there for the return journey, you turn it off and try and navigate back to where you came from. People will find that very, very difficult to do because you haven't retained any of the spatial memories or you haven't paid attention to the landscape around you. So it makes it very difficult, to come back on yourself. So I think it's also telling that, one thing that the new science has told us, has shown us, is that when you navigate using GPS, the cells in that spatial part of your brain, in the hippocampus, that usually are active and help us and build those spatial memories. When you're using GPS, that part of the brain is completely passive, inactive. Those cells just don't fire. There's no activity at all. So you can interpret that many different ways, but it's good to know that. I think if you use GPS, it may be fine. You don't use your hippocampus for that. You may never want to, but it is going to be inactive when you use technology, because it's not exciting your spatial senses.
And that must be a common cause of people getting lost, of setting out with some sort of digital device that then fails on them and they get lost and then don't have the skills to find their way back.
Yeah, I think so. If you look at the statistics from the Map and Rescue England Wales, especially Lake District seem to occur a lot, that people set off without map, compass, and just relying on GPS or one of the cell phone apps. So it's a known problem, and I think Snowdonia Park, one of the parks, had an interesting new method, location method. People to remember was each style they've milled a disc, a hole for a disc, and entered a disc with almost like a style number or so. I might be the grid reference for the style. It's a grid reference for the style, because people are just going on the map. Oh, you're stopped. No map, nothing. So in the very least, they can at least then go back to the next style. But it's a big, not a big problem, but it's an increasing problem. That's why all the education's been about, please take map, compass, and go for the training and the skills.
And it must be still a big part of your market as well, Emma. You need people to say, I want to learn how to use a map and compass. But they're not, because they're reliant on this technology in their pocket.
And I've noticed it with especially groups who come in younger through DOV or something like that. Often in the past, they've had at least a basic understanding, either from a geography lesson, which is great, or from scouts or something, or even from going out with a family member or a family friend or something like that, who had a knowledge of it, but more and more just totally unaware of everything. And the first question is like, oh, so what would you do if you got lost? Just get out my phone. And it's like, okay, what can you use on your phone that will tell you where you are? I'll just get Google Maps. Okay, Google Maps doesn't have the mountain paths on it. It doesn't have, it's just got green. Maybe it have a different shade of green if there's a forest. It won't tell you where the fences are. It won't tell you if you're in a bog. It won't tell you all of that. What will Google Maps tell you? If you zoom out on Google Maps, you'll be a blue dot in a bit of green close to a road, which is yellow, and maybe there'll be some houses with a name. That's not useful. And it's only if you kind of get them to see that they are just a blue dot in a sea of green on there. It's like, right, there is something else to it. So it can be useful to drive home the importance of you can't just rely on this, but then how much that gets through.
And I'm sure folk will remember, if you tuned into last month's conversation with Elise Downing, she set out to run all the way around the coast of Great Britain. And she was navigating the first half of it using Google Maps because she didn't know how to do it. And she had some horrendous experiences as a result of trying to run along various A roads. when there was perfectly good footpaths along the side. So she is now a great advocate for at least getting OS maps on your phone. I'm going to use the fascinating word again. I'd held off until this point, but there's something else, isn't there, that Michael talks about in the book about the importance of relating ourselves, learning to map read, relating ourselves in an environment to the landscapes and being able to look at that on a map, and that's the stimulus it provides to the brain and the mental health benefits that provides. And it seems fascinating that actually learning to properly navigate and map read has got the potential to stave off dementia and even to help improve our mental health, which, I mean, that blew me away, Michael, really, that because of the proximity of where these things are happening in the brain, learning to navigate could improve our brain health.
Yes, I mean, a lot of that is still very speculative, but what's true is that the hippocampus, which is the sort of the area of the brain where our spatial cells are, and that's the area that we use when we navigate and explore new territory. That hippocampus is extremely useful for many other cognitive functions, particularly memory, and we use it in our imagination, conceptual, abstract thinking, this kind of thing. It's very deeply connected to all kinds of other things we do, and to have if you can keep your hippocampus healthy and active, then it's going to be beneficial to all kinds of areas of your brain function. But I mean, it's too much of a stretch to say that we can stave off dementia by throwing away our technology. It's there's so many unknowns in this. The brain science is still fairly young, but what's clear is that using that spatial part of the brain has benefits for the whole brain, or for our whole mind, if you like.
And again, because it came from our evolution, it's hardwired into us to be able to understand our way around in that way. The other bit that related to that, I guess, that was fascinating was the idea that there are personality clues that can point to our ability to navigate. So you were talking about better navigators are often have energy and enthusiasm, diligence and attention to detail, and curiosity and openness. And so that, I imagine, we've got mountain rescue teams are full of energetic, enthusiastic, open folk. That must be characterized. That must be the key entry criteria, surely.
Pretty much, and yeah, I guess so. You've got I'd say 50% of the characteristics everybody has, and then the last 50% is a mixture of other skills and characteristics. But most people have got that. Yeah, they should have on them. If they're not interested in that, then or they don't have that mindset, then I don't know what they're doing now. Team, to be honest. But
I thought it was fascinating that you could see those traits in people. The mountain rescue guys are gonna give us a bit of a presentation on wayfinding in a couple of different contexts. So we're gonna pass over to them in a moment. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to carry on till about 9 o'clock. So there's going to be a bit more. Michael, I just wanted to say thank you for the book. It's absolutely fabulous. I love and you've got a wonderful summary. If you'll permit me to just read the last bit, because I think it sums us up. So you say, for almost all our evolutionary history, we've dedicated a great deal of our cognitive resources to learning about the space around us and how we fit into it. Where am I? Where do I belong? Where am I going? And how do I get there? These are raw questions of existence and survival. To answer them, our prehistoric ancestors developed powerful systems of memory that enabled them to make journeys of hundreds of miles in unfamiliar lands. We've been using these faculties ever since, Are we ready to give them up and pass our responsibility for wayfinding onto a technology that can do it for us? It's a question that any of us with a smartphone would do well to consider, because although GPS will deliver us to where we want to go, it might not help us answer some of those crucial existential questions, which I think is fab. So thank you for helping us answer some of those existential questions, Michael. It is fascinating.
Thanks, Tim. I feel I'm talking to people who are a lot more expert than I am on this subject. It's been great. Thank you.
Fab. Right. So now oh, have we got questions?
It's not a question, it's just Rob put something very nice. He said, Wayfinding was a book of 2021 for me, inspired me to start learning more about formal navigation through NNAS and continue to enjoy getting lost.
Amazing. Sorry, I should before we wrap up with Michael, I should give everyone the chance. Has anyone got any questions that they want to pitch to Michael before we hand over to the Mad and Rescue team, folks? If you want to start firing up your computer so we can start to plug it in, then yeah, we can go. So feel free to throw your questions into the chat. Are there any questions in the room? There's no questions from the room. No questions from the chat. Right, in that case, I'm going to get out of the way.
Oh,
No.
well, no, sorry. Becca Worrell has put, it will be my 2022 book. Haven't read it yet, but it will be on my birthday present list.
Fab.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Well-
Becca. Thanks, Rob.
Fab. Right, let's hand over. So I'm going to, yeah, there you go. So Michael's going to disappear off the main screen.